And we're back for episode 3.4. Our episode begins with Jaime and Brienne heading to Harrenhal after Jaime loses his sword hand. In both book and show, Jaime falls from his horse, drinks horse piss, and tries to fight with his left hand. However, in the book, these events occur over the course of several days. Now we should talk a bit about the amputation of Jaime's hand. Of course, in the book of Matthew, there's the famous line, "If thy right hand offends thee, cut it off." Jaime's sinful hand, the one that killed the king, the one that threw Bran from the tower, and the one that touches Cersei, is the one that was cut off. So in a symbolic way, Jaime's evil has been amputated. And although he does bang Cersei after losing his hand, Jaime has not killed since losing his hand, and is generally a better human being, at least in the book. Now next we get an interesting scene that's really from the previous book, where Varys tells Tyrion how he was cut. Varys was once a mummer, and one night he was bought by a sorcerer who castrated Varys and burned his dick and balls up. The sorcerer then spoke to a mysterious voice, and this is why Varys claims he hates magic. And here in the show, Varys has tracked down the sorcerer for his revenge. Now here's what's more interesting. In the book there are still houses that support a line of a legitimized Targaryen bastard named Daemon Blackfyre. And many fans, myself included, think Varys is a Blackfyre. The reason he shaves his head is to hide his silver hair, much in the same way that Egg shaved his head in the Dunk and Egg books. And if Varys is a Blackfyre, his castration makes sense. Someone was trying to snuff out his ability to procreate and continue on the Blackfyre line. Now the question remains, who was that mysterious voice that Varys heard? If Varys is a Blackfyre, the most probable candidate is the Blackfyre hater, Bloodraven. Now next we get an extra scene where Grenn and Ed are shoveling shit and Rast starts complaining about how the others are coming. And we get a scene where Gilly pleads with Sam for him to help her. This does happen in the book, but only after the mutiny takes place. Meanwhile, south of the wall, we have this extra scene with Bran dreaming of his mother. Now in the book, Bran and company come to a tower they dub Tumbledown Tower. They rest for a while, and Bran is actually quite happy there, figuring they can stay there and wait out the war. Jojen does his best to convince Bran to keep heading north, but Bran doesn't want to go. It's actually Mira that sits down with him and tells him to make his own decisions. Bran weighs his options and realizes that everywhere but north leads to him being crippled for the rest of his life. But again, it's interesting that Jojen is unable to convince Bran, but Mira is. Jojen is of course wiser and shares more in common with Bran, so he should have more influence. Yet Mira holds more sway, and the likely reason is because Bran is in love with her. Now next we have an extra scene where Ros is discussing Podrick's incredible ability to please women sexually. Apparently it's not the size of the boat, it's the motion of the ocean. The conversation quickly goes to Littlefinger and whether or not he's still interested in Sansa. Again, in the book, Littlefinger has been very careful not to talk to Sansa. He hasn't spoken to her in 2 books. Now here in the show, Varys has a network of spies and Ros is now working for him. But in the book, Varys has a whole slew of techniques for getting information. He climbs around in the walls and floors and listens. He dresses up in costumes and blends in. And he employs a network of tongueless children who hide in small spaces. Now next we get an extra scene with Joffrey taking Margaery around the Sept of Baelor and telling her the gruesome history of the Targaryens. He first mentions Rhaenyra, whose life corresponds with a huge boom in the number of dragons in the world. Rhaenyra was denied queenship, and this led to the Dance of the Dragons, where most dragons were killed off. After the dance, the remaining dragons were sickly and died. He then mentions Aerion Brightflame, who was a brother to Maester Aemon. Aerion and his brothers all dreamed of dragons returning, which led to all of their deaths except for Aemon's. He then ends with Aerys, who is killed by Jaime again because of his dragon dreams and his desire to burn up the city to bring dragons back. The moral of the story? Dragons get you killed. Now we also get this extra scene where Cersei and the Queen of Thorns sympathize about how sexist the world is. Interestingly, the QOT talks some smack about her son Mace Tyrell, saying he's never really been in a battle. That's mostly true, but in the book Mace Tyrell was at the Battle of Ashford. Sam's dad Randall did most of the work, but it's possible that Mace Tyrell was involved in some cleanup fighting. We also get this extra scene of Joffrey nervously going outside and finding that the crowd kind of likes him, though they mostly like Margaery. Now next we're back near the Dreadfort with Theon and Ramsay. In these scenes, Theon starts spilling his guts about his feelings about House Stark. In truth, Theon isn't that different from Jon Snow. He always wanted to be a Stark. After all, if Theon were Ironborn through and through, he would have listened to his dad. Yes, there are some other issues going on. He wants to impress his dad and he needs to have dominance over Asha Yara. But at the end of the day, Theon's desire to take Winterfell had to do with his relationship with the Starks. He loved them and wanted to be one of them, but he couldn't, so he decided to hate them and take Winterfell from them. Now in the book, Theon reveals this to a character named Lady Dustin in the 5th book, A Dance with Dragons. Lady Dustin had conspired with Roose Bolton in order to destroy the Starks. Why? Because she was in love with Brandon Stark and couldn't marry him. Now here Ramsay takes Theon through a somewhat secret door back into the Dreadfort, and Theon finds himself back at where he started. Theon's escape in both book and show seems a bit pointless, but let's keep in mind that Theon is a bit of a military genius. He was able to take Winterfell because he's smart and because he knew the secrets of the castle. Theon now knows the Dreadfort, and only time will tell if Theon is able to use this information for revenge. Speaking of revenge, next we have a scene straight out of the book where Brienne tells Jaime to eat, and if he needs motivation, he should think about revenge. And so Jaime eats, and he thinks about revenge on Robb Stark, Edmure Tully, and the Brave Companions. Of course, revenge on Robb Stark and the Brave Companions are robbed from him. Vargo Hoat in the end is killed by the Mountain in a very gruesome way. His arms and legs are cut off, and he's forced to cannibalize himself. This snaps Jaime out of his revenge mode. He next meets Edmure Tully, who he hates for keeping him in a dungeon for 6 months, and spares him. Now next we are treated to an extra scene where Cersei meets with her father while he writes a letter, and clearly this is supposed to mirror the earlier scene where Tyrion meets with him. Now in this scene, Cersei tries to explain to her father that despite being a woman, she could be his legacy. Now we only start to get Cersei's perspective in the 4th book, where we discover she's much more insane than she lets on. But her thoughts in A Feast for Crows very much shows that she considers herself Tywin's successor. However, it's a mystery whether Cersei actually loved her father. She feels no emotion when her father dies. However, Daenerys didn't feel any emotion when her brother or son died either, so something else might be going on. Now next we get an extra scene where Varys approaches the Queen of Thorns and tells her that Littlefinger is interested in Sansa Stark, and so he plants in her head the idea that Sansa should marry Loras. Now in the book, the Tyrells don't need anyone to tell them that the sky is blue. Everyone and their brother already knows that Sansa is the key to Winterfell. So in our next scene we have Marjorie trying to befriend Sansa, and she proposes the idea that Sansa marry Loras. Now in the book, this conversation happened back when Sansa first met with the Tyrells, back in the garden in the show, or in the Maiden Vault in the book. And in the book they don't suggest Loras because Loras is a Kingsguard. They instead suggest that Sansa marry Loras' older brother, Willis. Willis is a mysterious man that we don't know much about yet. We know he's scholarly, we know he's crippled, and we know he used to communicate with the man who crippled him, Oberyn Martell. Meanwhile, north of the Wall, the brothers are attending a funeral for a man named Bannon. Now in both book and show, Bannon is a highly skilled ranger, and in both book and show he dies of an infected foot. Now here in the show, Rast starts grumbling that Bannon died because he wasn't fed enough, which seems to inspire a man named Carl to stand up to Craster. Now in the book, things are a bit more interesting. As I said previously, Rast is a stand-in for a character named Chet, and Chet was only tolerating the Night's Watch because he had an easy job tending the ravens. A job that through Jon's manipulation was taken away from him and given to Sam. And so Chet formed a conspiracy at the Fist of the First Men to kill Mormont and a few others, including Bannon. And this is important. The conspiracy doesn't care about Bannon. Now let's fast forward to the mutiny. In the show, Carl is a stand-in for a book character named Dirk, and Dirk grumbles about the death of Bannon and starts a fight with Craster. But here's the thing. Dirk was in the conspiracy, meaning he didn't care about Bannon. Dirk was manipulating the men around him to gain more support. He wasn't hungry or scared of the others, he simply wanted Craster's life. And so in both book and show, Craster attacks Dirk Carl and is killed pretty easily. And then all hell breaks loose. Someone stabs Mormont and there's absolute chaos. And in the book, something very weird happens. Sam loses time. Of course, this happens to Kat right before she releases Jamie, and this happens to John right before the Whites attack at the wall. Sam finds himself a long time later, cross-legged on the floor with Mormont's head in his lap. And Mormont has a dying wish for Sam. Tell Jorah to join the Watch. Now you may think there's no way that this wish is ever going to get to Jorah, but Gilly is actually standing there when Mormont says this, and in the book, Gilly may have been left on a ship heading to Slaver's Bay. Anyway, Sam and Gilly flee, but weirdly in the book, Sam is without fear. Meanwhile, south of the wall, we're back with the Brotherhood without banners. Now, almost the entire Arya story from the third book has been cut from the show. Arya and the Brotherhood spend a whole lot of time searching for Beric Dondarrion, and Arya meets a whole cast of characters, including the old knight Lyman Leicester, the Lady of the Leaves, the Ghost of High Heart, Lady Smallwood, the people of Stony Sept in the brothel, and the people of the town of House Goodbrook. The most important thing to know about this long journey is that the network of the Brotherhood without banners is incredibly extensive. Also, the characters they meet have no love of the Starks and no love of the Lannisters. The War of the Five Kings has been brutal on the Riverlands and has soured many people to both sides. Additionally, much of the network were Targaryen loyalists. And here in the show, Thoros expresses his dislike of both the Starks and the Lannisters as well. Now in both book and show, the Brotherhood without banners is very much interested in justice, and wants the Hound to pay for his brother's crimes. The Hound points out that he's not his brother, so Arya wants the Hound to be killed for killing Micah, despite the Hound only following orders. And so in the end, the Hound is told that he will have a trial by combat. Now if the Brotherhood's sense of justice seems a bit off, that's the whole point. The Hound's trial is a metaphor for war. In war, people are killed for the crimes of their fellow countrymen, and in war, people are killed for the crimes of their leaders. And war itself is a trial by combat. The point being, there is no justice in war. And finally, over in Slaver's Bay, Dany is trading a dragon for an army. Now, as I've mentioned in previous videos, in the book, Dany's brain is definitely getting screwed with. She receives dreams before doing impulsive things like wildly riding a horse or standing up to her brother or deciding to leave an oasis town. At minimum, we know that her dreams make her lose her fear, and we know that at least some of her dreams are sent by Quaithe. Dany has two dream experiences in Astapor. First, she has a dream about having sex with a shadowy figure, she wakes up horny, and then has Eerie go down on her. Later, she decides to trade a dragon for an army. In her second dream, Quaithe shows up and reiterates, to go north you must go south, to reach the west you must go east, to go forward you must go back, and to touch the light you must pass beneath the shadow. And the next day, Dany slaughters the slavers. Now in both book and show this exchange is very similar, but there's one big difference in the book that makes many fans argue about whether or not Dany is evil or insane. In the book, Dany orders that all men wearing upper-class clothing be put to death, except those under 12. And while people can debate the evilness of the slave masters, it's really hard to argue that 12-year-olds are not innocent. So yes, Dany's actions at Astapor are definitely crazy and evil, but Dany's mind was getting screwed with as well. So I would say the jury is still out about whether or not Dany is nuts. And that's all for episode 3.4. See you in episode 3.5.